Welcome to the Peer Support Podcast, where we're going over all sorts of topics to increase our overall wellness. Today I'm here with Tyra Scriver. We're going to be going over Brainburn, some fitness things, talking about primitive brain versus executive brain. Tyler, why don't you start off? Tell us a little bit about Brainburn, what it is, and kind of how we can recognize it.
Yeah. First, to understand brain burn, you got to understand that we have two different brains. We have our primitive brain and our executive brain. And the way that I like to look at it is our primitive brain is in charge of our survival. Its job is to keep us alive. Our executive brain, it helps us in more thoughtful exercises, more important life choices. It helps us with problem solving. It helps us do the things besides the fight, flight, or freeze. That's where the primitive brain comes in. So what is brain burn? So when we have a stress response, our brain automatically goes into primitive brain mode. We get that adrenaline dump and we start having these responses, whether or not it is we're going to run from something, we're going to fight something, or we're going to freeze. And when that happens a lot, especially for first responders, we start to develop what's known as brain burn. And brain burn can manifest in a couple ways. So you can have trouble sleeping. You can be super irritable. You can feel just completely detached from just your world, from people that you normally love. You get these looped feelings, negative thoughts, things like that. Brain burn is when our cognitive or our executive brain has become exhausted and we're just kind of living in that primitive brain kind of mindset.
Yeah, and I think brain burn, the first time I heard it in one of the Mind Shield classes that we had, was an important term for me to hear, is because I feel like a lot of the times, especially in this field, at least before that class, I didn't have a very good gauge of the spectrum. It's either like you're doing pretty good, you're pretty resilient, or you have PTSD. And I just didn't understand a lot of the in-between kind of phases. And so you'd have these moments of, what they described as cognitive exhaustion. And I'd have moments like, man, is this PTSD? This can't be PTSD. Like, people have had way worse stuff than me. But, this definitely doesn't feel normal. And so brain burn was a good thing for me to learn about, just to kind of normalize some of the things that I was feeling. And then to also know that it wasn't as bad as I thought it could be. But it also wasn't like the best spot either, right? It was a good kind of gray area medium, because it's hard to work on something or to start resolving it, right, until you kind of know what it is. And if you think you're working on PTSD but it's really not, then you're probably not going to get very far.
Oh yeah, 100%. No, I think you're completely right. I don't necessarily notice my brain burn, but I'll tell you 100% who does, and that's my wife and my children. Usually the day that I get off shift, they're super excited to see me. And Erin, she's the first to point out that I'm detached or that I'm extra irritable, those kind of things. And a lot of that I just kind of thought was, oh, I'm tired because I've just been on a 48, or that, I need to eat or exercise a little bit, do something like that. And it wasn't until she took the peer support classes with the spouses that she was actually starting to recognize that, like, I need to have a minute. I'm in brain burn. That my primitive brain is active, and we need to feed me, get me some rest, take care of those basic needs, and then slowly work into getting that executive brain to start to function again.
And so if you're not recognizing brain burn in yourself, to be humble enough to allow somebody else to point it out, and that can be a hard thing to do, but super helpful. Okay, so how do we fix it, right? And how do we get out of brain burn? The wife or your kid or whoever has pointed out, and you've acknowledged that, okay, fine, maybe you're right. So how do we start to turn the brain burn off, And there's a few things you can do. And Tyler mentioned earlier, it starts by understanding your brain works in two ways: primitive brain and executive brain. And again, kind of referring back to that course, that's the results and actions part is your primitive brain functioning. But when you take a step back and are evaluating your actions, and you're kind of, evaluating what you believe about different experiences you've had, and you're taking the time to kind of analyze, then that's your executive brain functioning. Now, the best time to activate your executive brain is probably not in the heat of the moment, right? So to get yourself out of the moment, and there's lots of breathing exercises or different things like that. But of course, I think an excellent way, which maybe doesn't come right to mind for some, but we know it helps. Like if somebody's stressed and they say, you know what, I just like hitting the gym when I'm stressed. Why do they like hitting the gym? And I think this puts into context kind of what's working there when you go start exercising and hitting the gym.
And kind of like for your first point is that humble pie. Also, being able to recognize that brain burn in other people is super, super important. Like I said, it's done wonders for my relationship with my wife, because now earmuffs children, before she went through the course, that day one usually would end up with at some point her saying, "Why are you acting like such a dick right now?" And for me, I'm like, I'm not being a dick. I'm just surviving. I'm just here. I'm going through the motions. I might not be talking. I might not be laughing. I might not be doing any of those things, but I'm, digging the hole in the backyard for the new trampoline to go in. Or I'm with my children, but I'm not really with my children. Something that's helped is now, instead of like, hey, you're acting like a jerk, and me instantly becoming defensive, we have this terminology that I know now. And she says, hey, you know what? Like, you're being a little primitive. You're acting a little caveman now. And it doesn't hit me the same way as like a personal attack. And so that way I know, okay, I can start to use these strategies like going to the gym. Usually what my first 24 hours looks like when I get off shift is I get home and we have a good breakfast. We talk a little bit, but I tend not to want to talk a ton afterwards. You've spent 48 hours dealing with people, taking care of patients, that kind of thing. I just want to be almost just left alone in a good way. Like I just need to be able to recharge my batteries. So I'll take a nap, and then we usually end up going to the gym. And I kind of think about it as like, if my body is ready, I mean, you go on a call and you get that adrenaline dump and you're ready to fight that grizzly or, do whatever, you get all that adrenaline, but what do you end up doing? You're putting an IV in somebody, you're administering medications. Really, you're just talking, and there's some physical aspects in there, but it's not that fight or flight situation. And so when you go to the gym, you're able to work out to get a lot of that physical tension, that built up baggage that you've been just accruing over the last 48 hours. And you're able to get that out in a healthy way. You're helping your body process what you've just gone through. Do I always feel like I want to go to the gym? No. Usually I'm tired. But once I get there and I practice some of these techniques that we're going to talk about, I feel better. Even if my lifts have suffered, or even if it's pure survival mode when I'm there, I know when I'm done, I'm going to be a better father or a better husband, or just a more active, emotionally prepared person.
Yeah, I think you bring up an awesome point, because to engage our executive brain doesn't have to be complicated. It's not this big 12, 14 step process to, check off this list and now my executive brain's activated. Sometimes it's just time. You just need time to do nothing, or to sleep, or whatever, for your brain just to rest. There's that study that came out a little while ago in the movie with Will Smith about the NFL players and their concussions and the brain damage that would cause. What was interesting about the study, though, which I think applies in the same way, that out of all the NFL players that were suffering from CET, only 20% of them had large, massive hits to the brain, large concussive moments. But what they found is in 80% of the the guys suffering, it was all little repeated hits with no time to recover. It wasn't the big one-time sacks on the QB. It was the repeated hit to the head, no time to recover, next play. And if you think about kind of how our 48-hour shifts can go, you're not going on crazy calls all the time, one after the other, but you are in kind of that primitive mode. And it's sometimes just little calls, but it's one after the other. Or, you're dealing with all these kind of survival type things with no time to rest. And so sometimes it's just as simple as taking the time to rest. We've talked a lot about brain burn and primitive brain, executive brain on shift and with family, but applying that now purely to the fitness world, engaging your executive brain while working out is actually super productive. I know when I'm at the gym, I'm just trying to survive. I don't want the bar to crush me. So I'm just surviving, just push it off. But tell us a little bit more about using your executive brain while you're moving weight.
Yeah, no, totally. So in the podcast that I reference on the newsletter, there's a doctor of kinesiology. I think he's from California State, Andy Galpin. He talks about being smart while you work out. Most people think that like strength comes from muscle, but it's way more complex than that. You have your central nervous system, your peripheral nervous system. Sure, muscles are in there, but nerves are just as important as muscle mass. I mean, this is how you get those people that are 165 pounds and they can deadlift 405 pounds versus the guy that's 200 pounds and he can't pull the same weight. And it's they might have more muscle mass, they might have that thing, but they've trained just completely different. So in that podcast, he talks about power and having a difference between strength and power. And so strength is about moving that weight, pushing that bar off of you so it doesn't crush you and kill you. And he said, if that's what you're going for is just strictly strength, that's awesome. But you can hit it at a deeper level and go for power. And power is not only are you utilizing that strength, but you're training for speed and the explosiveness of that particular exercise or body movement that you're using. I kind of think about the primitive brain is like a strength-based movement. You're there, you're bench pressing, and your goal is to just pick the weight up
and not die.
And not die. Exactly. Your grizzly bear is not being crushed by a 200-pound bench press. Versus when you're performing the movement, obviously having good form, but when the moment you pull that, you unrack that weight, your goal is to push that weight away from you as fast as you can. And it's pretty amazing. Example one, you pull that weight off, you push it off, and all you're trying to do is move the weight and you're just trying to survive. Versus repeatedly pulling that weight off, pushing the bar at least in your brain, pushing it as fast as you can. Now the weight might not move faster in both situations, but over time, as you think about pushing that away from you faster and faster and faster, you're going to start developing more and more power versus just having that strength. And power, again, is strength and speed combined. Two things that are super important in our job. Having a more executive workout or engaging that executive brain can just make gains. You can make the most out of your workout and be more than just this like one-dimensional, two-dimensional kind of a person. You can have the strength plus the power plus the conditioning and the muscle endurance just by some of these things. For example, being more mindful when you lift. Not only thinking about pushing that bar away from you as fast as you can with good form, thinking about the muscles that you're using while you're performing that specific exercise. And it could be anywhere from an isolated exercise like a bicep curl. When I say isolation, I mean using one muscle versus a whole muscle group. For like a compound muscle groups would be like pull-ups, squat, deadlifts, those kind of things, jump squats, front squats. I mean, anything where you're using more than just really like one muscle, you get those compound muscle groups. But thinking about the muscles that you're using when you're supposed to be using them, you're going to get more nerve involvement. And the more nerves that are involved, the more muscle fibers that are going to fire, the better coordination that you get while you're performing the lift. And again, you're going to get more than just a strength gain or an endurance gain or conditioning. I mean, it's going to turn into this multifaceted overall executive better workout.
Yeah, I love that, because I think, a lot of times people are always kind of looking for the next little gimmick or whatever with fitness and some new gadget. And some people are a little more prone to buying gadgets for their gym or whatever.
Who are you talking about right now?
Like, it doesn't matter. But, trying to like get the next thing. But reality is, like, you can get so much more productivity, like you said, just by thinking about the workouts you're already doing. And, I think you mentioned this in the newsletter too, but like, this isn't just for moving weights. If we got the master of the stadium, Brent Hellstrom, retiring here soon. And, I'm sure everybody here on the department has had the experience of doing the stairs with Brett. And how would you apply this executive brain in that situation, to just running the stairs?
Yeah. So instead of just, showing up and putting one foot in front of the other, a couple approaches that I like to do. When I start off with the stairs, the first couple flights, I usually take them relatively slow, and I think through the process. If we're starting on the one side of the stadium, I usually start the lower bowl and I skip every single step. And it's not so much about like just getting up the steps. It's a slow cognitive thought of like, okay, so I'm going to go up to this step. And as I go up to this step, I'm going to bring my knee up to this point, and then I'm going to push off with my toe. And I'm going to do this. It's going to turn into more of a lunge than just me stepping up. And I'll do that on the bottom set. And then once we get to the top set, I'll start hitting every single step, but instead of just, one foot in front of another, this mindless, like pure survival, trying to go up there, I think about where I'm going to put my feet or how I'm going to land on my toe or what my cadence is as I go up. How exactly am I going to go up these and where am I going to breathe? The whole time, you can put music in and you can zone out and you can do the steps, you can do your workout, but you'll lose a lot of that muscle mind connection when you do that. There have been studies that have shown that people will put music on and they'll think, man, they absolutely just crushed the workout. And then they'll do another workout where they don't use music and they're not distracted, and they'll actually get a better workout. They'll get more muscle recruitment because they're thinking about what they're doing versus like, okay, here's a song, sure, it makes me feel good. Europe's Final Countdown, that's always a good one, or ACD, Back in Black, something along those lines. Thunderstruck, oh yeah, another great one. Definitely good for distracting me, but those first little bit, that you can call it that warm up, I usually don't have any music on, and I think about this, and I like to feel my body. I like to see how my ankle feels or how my knee's feeling. And that way, as I continue to go through the stairs, I can slowly ramp it up. I can, if I'm going to go for speed and I want to focus on more of like a lunge, well, I'm going to skip every single step, no matter whether I'm on the top of the bowl or the bottom of the bowl. If I'm looking for speed, you have speed skaters, or you'll see them a lot in football drills where they do really, really quick steps and high knees. If that's what I'm going for during my stairs that day, well, I know I'm going to hit every single step. And when I go up every single step, I'm going to bring my knee up a little bit higher than I normally would, because now I've turned it into this speed coordination drill.
The other thing I like about that too, and just an example of kind of the power of the executive brain is, and kind of bringing it back to brain burn. If you're feeling the brain burn, engaging your executive brain kind of gets you back to zero, right? Like if brain burn is bringing you down, executive brain gets you back to zero. But this example with the fitness and how you can just use a simple tactic by just thinking about what you're doing takes you way above, right? So the executive brain isn't just for getting you back to zero and back to level, but when you engage it, it can actually push you way into the positive, which I think is pretty cool. And especially a super simple, accessible thing anybody can do. Anybody who's already working out, it's an easy thing to implement or to try the next time you're on shift and you're hitting the gym, or Rhett's making you do the stairs or whatever it is. Just think about, rather than thinking about hating Rhett and what a jerk he is for making everybody run the stairs all the time, you're thinking about, those thoughts exactly what causes brain burn, right? Instead, you're thinking about that mind-body, mind-muscle connection, and you're actually pushing it way into the positive. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
There's lots of tactics from yoga and breathing and other things you can also do to kind of put yourself in that executive brain mode. But it can be as simple or as comprehensive as you want it to be. And just, I think by reading the newsletter, just by wanting to engage your executive brain, you're already starting down that path. And just the power that comes when that happens. I just want to end on a quick story from a recent call and kind of brag on some guys that I was with. But I just think it's a good example of kind of how primitive and executive brain work together, but then how ultimately the consequences of not using your executive brain can take you down some pretty rocky roads. On shift with Luke Brandon, Jason Killinan, and Steve Sorensen. We're at Station 70. We get a call for difficulty breathing. We show up, ladies in the recliner, changing color, lips are blue, so we know it's go time. And so immediately, right, me and Luke, primitive brain, survival mode, we're jumping in, starting to go through all the motions. And of course, that's the 100% right thing to do, right? Like when you're in that situation, you don't have time to, that. And I think everybody would agree, you're not like thinking, okay, how am I going to executive brain this? Do we evaluate? No, like you recognize there's the real emergency, like it's time. Training kicks in and you go to work. But then in walks Jason and Steve, and Jason jumps in with me and Luke to kind of help us get to the next steps. And I'll never forget, but Steve takes 5 seconds, maybe not even that long, looks at the situation, walks over to the family, the husband of the lady in the chair and the daughter, and looks right at him and says, hey, does she have any other medical history? She has cancer. Does she have a DNR? Yes, she does. He's like, and looked right at the husband and he said, sir, your wife is dying. You need to make a decision right now on whether you'd like us to honor that paperwork. And I was just like, holy crap. Like, how do you, in this moment of literal life or death, have the ability, engage that executive brain, step back from the situation and help the family kind of make the right call? And ultimately the family decided fairly quickly too. And I think that's in large part of how direct Steve was, but decided we better honor her paperwork. And so before we got super deep into, cutting clothes off and the whole things, we were able to kind of pull back and let her go fairly peacefully. So anyway, I wanted to share that because I think that's a scenario everybody has probably experienced in one form or another. But it just, after talking about the primitive and executive brain, so that's a perfect analogy for what we do every day on what the primitive brain started doing, what happened when the executive brain got involved, and ultimately when that executive brain was engaged, we had the best outcome that wasn't necessarily survival that the primitive brain was going for, but it was the best for what everybody in that room wanted. And so you apply that to just our daily life and how we think, and just taking that simple time to engage your executive brain can have some pretty awesome results.
Yeah, I just take a second to talk about a recent call, super, super quick, where, I was saved by Captain Craner in a very similar situation. We're going in and I'm the lead on this call, and we show up. It's like, yeah, we're going to save this person. The wife's yelling at me, and she's saying, save him, don't save him, save him, don't save him. I was like, okay, I can't deal with you right now. Go talk to Captain Craner. And unfortunately, in my more primitive brain moment, sorry, Liz, I got to talk about it. I told her to cut a down coat, and as soon as we did that, feathers exploded everywhere. So unfortunately, we didn't quite get some good intervention before the feather explosion. But after Captain Craner talked to this gentleman's wife, and he took that tactical pause and really looked at the whole situation. We again ended up having to honor that DNR, and it was pretty amazing. One last thing, real quick thought, is your body cannot differentiate between stress. All it knows is you have stress, whether that is emotional stress or physical stress, whether that you're going to do a workout or if you're running the 2-minute drill. All it knows is it needs some help, and there are certain things that it's going to do to fix that. And that's why we have our primitive brain. Pretty awesome. You're talking about these simple things that you can do. So following your workout, following your call, following whatever it is when you engage that primitive brain, practice some mindful breathing. What it's going to do is it's going to prevent the dreaded crash, of whether it's the pre-workout that you took or whatever. You're in the gym, you're putting your body under all this stress, you have all this adrenaline, you're running into perform CPR or pick up an old person that fell at one of our lovely nursing homes or something like that. You're still getting that adrenaline dump when those tones go off after everything is said and done, or heck, before, when you're going to the scene, practice some of that mindful breathing. Take that tactical pause, engage that executive brain, and you're going to see, hopefully, an increase in resilience and that brain burn decrease. You're going to be able to sleep better. You're going to have more patience for your children. You're going to, all in all, hopefully feel more connected to yourself, physically, emotionally, hopefully, spiritually, any of those things. So that'd be the one little challenge I have for everybody.
Yeah, love it. I can't help but think of one of the greats, Bill Burr, talking about, bottling and something up, shoving it in a jar, and then thinking and wondering, man, who in my life that I love is going to pay for this later? And, we laugh because, he says it in a funny way, but it's so true. When we ignore these feelings and we just stay in that primitive brain to survive and move on to the next thing, it's not just us we're affecting. Who in our life that we love are we making pay for that later? Versus like Steve and Captain Craner, to be the OIC of your own brain for a second, pause, think about what you're doing, engage that executive brain, do it during your workouts, do it during Brainburn, whatever you need to do to just pause for a second. And, you can only get great results.
I love how you said OIC and not like actual captain or chief or anything like that. Because we all know our spouses are the captains of our brains. So we can sometimes be in charge of it, sometimes. But
we are. So appreciate everybody that's tuned in and checked out the podcast today. I hope that you got a few things out of it. Just know that anybody on the peer support team, if you have more questions about brain burn or just want to talk about stuff, you don't have to be in crisis to want to just talk more about brain burn or primitive executive brain. Everybody's kind of had, some training on that, and we'd love to talk about it. Just to sometimes it's kind of a topic that's fun to dig into. Thanks, guys. We'll see you on the next one.